When you live out on a ranch, you learn to pay attention to the little details most people ignore. Things like a loose fence post, a broken latch on a barn door, or the way your horses act restless at night. Ranch life is built on routine and vigilance, because the smallest slip-up can lead to big problems. So when my electricity bill doubled out of nowhere, I noticed. At first, I thought maybe it was my mistake. Summer heat had been brutal that year, and I figured maybe the AC had been running more than I realized. But even then, the numbers didn't add up. My ranch wasn't some city mansion full of electronics. It was a working property, where most of the energy went to lighting barns, running the well pump, and keeping the walk-in freezer cold for the beef we processed. Yet the bill was so high it made my stomach twist. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, spreading the bill out under the light. I rubbed my jaw, thinking through all the possibilities. My dad used to tell me, "Son, numbers don't lie, but people sure do." The next day, I walked the entire property. Every barn, every shed, every storage building. I wanted to make sure there wasn't something draining power I'd forgotten about. Everything checked out fine. That's when I started to suspect foul play. Now, most of my land sat on the edge of a community run by the dreaded HOA. I'd inherited the ranch long before they ever showed up, but over the years, those cookie-cutter houses started creeping closer and closer to my fences. And with them came the queen of entitlement herself, Karen. Karen wasn't just your average HOA busybody. She was the kind of woman who strutted around like she owned everyone else's property. She'd once left a note on my gate demanding I repaint my barn, because it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Never mind that my barn was older than every single house in her development. So when I thought about who might be bold enough to siphon electricity from my ranch, her face popped into my mind immediately. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. And I wasn't about to accuse anyone without evidence. But a few nights later, fate handed me the first clue. I was walking back from the stables when I noticed something strange along the fence line. A faint glow, like a light where there shouldn't be one. I followed it quietly, boots crunching in the dry grass, until I saw it. A thick extension cord snaking under my fence, disappearing into the darkness toward the HOA homes. My blood boiled. Someone, no, Karen, was stealing my power. The sight of that thick orange extension cord lying across my fence made my stomach churn, with equal parts anger and disbelief. I knelt down and traced it with my hand, following its path as far as I could before it disappeared under a row of bushes. The cord was warm to the touch. That meant it was live, actively carrying power from my property into someone else's home. Now, most folks would have ripped it out right then and there. And trust me, the temptation was there. But I've been on this land long enough to know that you don't walk into a fight blind. If Karen was behind this, she'd deny it to the bitter end, maybe even try to turn the HOA against me. No, if I wanted to win, I needed proof. The next morning, I drove into town and picked up a cheap little trail camera. Hunters use them to track deer, but ranchers like me use them to keep an eye on fences, gates, and sometimes trespassers. I set it up on a fence post overlooking the cord, making sure it had a clear view of anyone messing with it. For 3 nights, I waited. And sure enough, the footage didn't disappoint. There she was, Karen herself, strutting across the property line like she owned the place. She had on one of those ridiculous silk robes, the kind that probably cost more than a month's worth of feed, and she was hauling groceries in from her car. When she noticed the cord had come loose from the plug near my barn, she casually reconnected it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The audacity of it all left me speechless. I didn't even need to watch more footage. One clip was enough. She was stealing my electricity, bold as daylight, and acting like it was her God-given right. The following morning, I marched right up to her pristine little house in the HOA subdivision. Her lawn looked fake, like green plastic, watered within an inch of its life, while my ranch grass crunched dry under my boots. She answered the door with that smug smile she always wore, the kind that said she thought she was untouchable. "Karen," I said flatly, holding up my phone with the footage cued. "Care to explain why you're plugged into my barn?" For a moment, the mask slipped. Her eyes went wide, lips twitching. But just as quick, she recovered, tossing her head back with a laugh. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she said. "That's just a temporary solution. The HOA has been slow fixing a transformer issue, and my house was losing power. You've got plenty, so I figured it was no big deal." No big deal. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. "You're stealing, Karen. That's a crime. You can't just..." Before I could finish, she cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're the victim here. You've got a massive ranch. What's a little electricity compared to the fortune you're sitting on? Besides, the HOA has the right to ensure community welfare. Technically, your property benefits from our rules, so this is just balancing things out." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insane. Here she was, justifying literal theft with HOA nonsense. "You've got 24 hours to unplug that cord," I told her, voice low and steady. "If it's not gone, the sheriff will be involved." Her smug smile returned, sharper this time. "You wouldn't dare. Go ahead, call the cops. You'll look like a bitter old rancher picking on a single woman just trying to live comfortably. I'll have the whole HOA backing me up before the end of the day." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there on her perfect little porch, fists clenched at my sides. My dad's words rang in my ears again: "Numbers don't lie, but people sure do." Karen thought she was untouchable. But she hadn't counted on one thing. I was stubborn, and I had proof. That night, I made the call to the sheriff. The morning after my call, I was already out feeding the horses when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A county sheriff's truck rolled up the drive, sunlight glinting off the polished badge on the door. Out stepped Sheriff Daniels, a broad-shouldered man with a calm presence. He'd known my family for years, and he didn't waste time on small talk. "You said you've got proof someone's stealing power off your ranch?" he asked, adjusting his hat. I nodded and handed him my phone, the video queued up and ready. Daniels squinted at the screen, his expression tightening as Karen appeared in her silk robe, casually plugging herself back into my barn like it was her personal outlet. He let out a low whistle. "Well, that's about as clear-cut as it gets. Folks try to disguise theft, but she ain't even hiding it." "Bold as brass," I muttered. Daniels nodded. "All right. Let's pay her a visit. You coming with me?" "You bet," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. We climbed into our trucks, me following close behind him as we rolled down the road toward the HOA development. It always felt strange, driving from open pasture into those rows of copper paste houses. Everything looked too neat, too artificial, like the whole place was pretending to be something it wasn't. And waiting on her driveway, arms crossed and a smirk plastered on her face, was Karen. It was almost as if she had been expecting us. "Well, Sheriff Daniels," she called out, her voice carrying that syrupy sweetness that always masked something rotten. "What brings you to our neighborhood today? Surely not some complaint from my eccentric neighbor." She flicked her eyes toward me with disdain. Daniels wasn't fazed. He stepped right up, holding my phone in his hand. "Afternoon, I'm here because we received evidence of you illegally tapping into Mr. Carter's power line." Karen gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her chest. Oh, Sheriff, that's just absurd. Why on earth would I? He cut her off with a raised hand. We've got video of you doing exactly that. For the first time, her smirk wavered. Only for a second, but I caught it. That video is taken completely out of context, she said quickly, her voice rising. I told him the HOA authorized a temporary connection until our repairs were finished. This is all a misunderstanding. Daniels cocked an eyebrow. Funny thing, I called the electric company before I drove out here. No transformer issues reported. No outages. No authorizations. Care to explain that? The neighbors had started peeking out their windows now, curious about the sheriff's truck parked in front of Karen's house. Curtains shifted. A few people even stepped out onto their lawns, whispering to one another. Karen's face flushed deep red, but she tried to push through it with more bluster. Sheriff, with all due respect, I think you're being misled. He's always had a grudge against me, because I hold him accountable to HOA standards. He's just trying to smear me. Daniel said firmly, you can spin it however you like, but stealing electricity is theft. Theft is a crime. And if I have to, I'll have a warrant to check the inside of your property. We both know what I'll find. That's when it happened, the exact moment she realized the game was up. Her jaw clenched, eyes darting around as the neighbors gathered closer. Some of them were whispering, others outright pointing. The perfect image she always projected was crumbling right there on her driveway. You wouldn't dare cut my power, she hissed, her voice low now, venomous. Daniels didn't flinch. He turned toward his truck, grabbed a small toolbox, and motioned for one of the deputies who had arrived as backup. Together, they walked straight to the side of Karen's house where the meter Saturday. Karen shrieked, running after them. You can't do this. This is harassment. I'll sue you, I'll sue him, I'll sue everyone. But it didn't matter. In less than 5 minutes, the deputies disconnected the illegal setup and shut down her house power at the source. The lights inside flickered off. The humming AC unit went silent. And in the heavy stillness that followed, you could almost hear her pride shatter. The neighbors stood frozen for a moment, then the whispers started spreading like wildfire. A few even chuckled. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had just been exposed as a thief in front of the entire neighborhood. Her face was crimson, eyes wild as she turned back toward me. You'll regret this, she spat. You think you've won, but you don't know who you're dealing with. I simply crossed my arms and stared back, calm and steady. No, Karen. I think everyone here knows exactly who they're dealing with now. Karen didn't speak to me for days after the sheriff shut off her power. Truth be told, that was the quietest the neighborhood had been in years. No more passive-aggressive notes taped to my gate. No more HOA letters about my unsightly livestock. No more ridiculous complaints about my barn, ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. But the silence didn't mean she'd given up. 2 days later, I got a neatly folded envelope shoved through the slats of my front gate. Inside was a letter from the HOA board, stamped with their fancy logo, declaring that my aggressive behavior toward a community member was being reviewed. They threatened me with fines, legal action, even possible restrictions on my property, to ensure neighborhood harmony. I almost laughed out loud. Here they were, doubling down, trying to protect their queen bee after she'd been caught red-handed. They wanted me to be the villain, the rough rancher bullying their beloved HOA leader. So I did what my father always taught me to do. I gathered receipts. I compiled everything, the video footage, screenshots of Karen's texts and messages she'd once bragged to a neighbor about, hacking into my power line, and even copies of my inflated utility bills. Then I wrote my own letter, not to the HOA, but to the county commissioner's office. Within a week, county investigators were on the case. And once they had the sheriff's report, the footage, and my documentation, it didn't take long for the truth to come out. The fallout hit like a thunderclap. First, Karen was slapped with a hefty fine for theft of utilities. Then came the civil penalties for tampering with an electrical system. To top it off, she had to reimburse me for every cent of the power she'd stolen, plus damages for trespassing on my land. When the news reached the HOA, their precious reputation was in shambles. Neighbors who once defended her started distancing themselves fast. Some even stopped me in town to shake my hand, muttering things like, "Never liked her anyway," or, "She finally got what was coming." The board tried to spin it, of course. They called it a misunderstanding in their newsletter, but the damage was done. Karen's hold over the community had snapped like a brittle fence post in a storm. The final straw came one sweltering afternoon a month later. I was mending a section of barbed wire when I noticed a moving truck rumbling through the HOA streets. And there she was, Karen, standing on her porch, red-faced and barking orders at the movers. Her once perfect lawn was patchy and brown, her windows dark without the stolen electricity that had kept her place glowing like a beacon. She was leaving. I leaned on the fence post, watching as she loaded the last of her precious designer furniture into the truck. When the door slammed shut and the truck pulled away, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The ranch was quiet again. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the sun dip low over the pasture. The cicadas sang, the horses shifted in their stalls, and the world felt right again. Karen had thought she was untouchable, that the HOA's rules made her queen of the land. But in the end, truth and stubborn grit had outlasted her arrogance. And as I watched the stars blink awake in the wide Texas sky, I knew one thing for certain. On this ranch, my family's ranch, no one would ever steal from me again.